It sent out a message because it was shocking to see that, a mundane item like a pager was exploding in this extremely coordinated symphony of destruction in different parts of Lebanon. There would have been a deception as far as export licensing is concerned. There would have been a deception as far as the paperwork for the consignment dispatch is concerned, from wherever, from Hungary to Israel to wherever. There would have been some kind of deception as far as receiving the freight is concerned, or the transport through which these pagers would have gone. There would have been a deception in terms of the distribution of those pagers once they reached Lebanon. There would have been a deception in terms of what this front company was, whether it was licensed to actually conduct these transactions. That would have been one of the key deceptions, of course. There would have been a deception in terms of the retail or distribution of these pagers and to whom. Who was it who ensured that at least some of these pagers went to the people they were intended to go to? What happened? It's a bit of a paradox. What happened was terribly complex to plan, but what actually happened was really simple.
True, to execute, yeah.
It's almost comical. 1 hour after the story broke, there were memes.
Yeah.
There were memes, internet memes about what happened, and cartoons and things like that. Dev, I cannot overstate what enormous lessons there are for India, the Indian military, Indian security agencies.
Hello and welcome. This is the 40th episode of In Our Defense, and what a crazy, crazy week it has been, Shiv, in the world of defense. Things are blowing up, so to speak.
Or rather offense in this case.
Yeah. I laughed, but it's actually quite a serious topic, and we'll get into the entire gamut of this topic. Some may have guessed already we're talking about what's happening in Lebanon for the last 2 days.
The world has changed.
The world has changed, definitely. On Tuesday evening, India time, we had reports of some devices blowing up all over the place in Lebanon. It was we later found out those were pagers. Yeah. I'm sorry, this was Wednesday. Sorry, I stand corrected. It was Wednesday when this happened. I had just left office, I think, and I was in the gym, if I'm not wrong. And I could not just believe what I was seeing. And, in between my workout, I was like, what is going on? So before we talk about what's happened in the last 2 days, before we get into the various speculative theories that the two of us have read, that you'll have based on your experience of having covered this field for so many years, I want your first reaction when you came across this piece of news, because when you cover the world of defense, when you host a podcast on defense, when you have an interest in stuff like defense, you have two different forms of literature that you read, or different forms of videos, or whatever video films that you watch. One is the hard reality, and one is the fiction one. You enjoy both. I do. I know that. I would never ever have thought that something what happened this week with pages of Hezbollah militants blowing up in Lebanon en masse at the same moment, same second, and the day later, walkie-talkies by the same militant being used by the same militant group, again blowing up at the same moment, is something that I would ever read about in an actual non-fiction book of spy operations. Disclaimer, we don't know if it was a spy operation, but again, we'll get to that. So like I said, before we get to what it was, whether it was a spy operation or not, whether Mossad was involved, etc., your first reaction when you came across this news flashing on your phone?
So the first words that came to my mind when I heard about this was, and so it begins. Because frankly, I wasn't surprised at all, and I'll tell you why I wasn't surprised by what was happening. And since on this podcast we call a spade, let's be clear, this was the Mossad. Israel can deny it till kingdom come, but this was obviously a Mossad operation. There may have been other agencies involved. It's possible that certain other security agencies from other countries, needless to say the United States, may have been involved. We don't know for sure. But this particular operation also didn't shock me very much because it's really just a modern version of stuff that the Mossad has done in the past in a much more limited manner. They've dating back to the 70s, in fact, and we'll get into that in more detail. But I think the meticulous level of planning that would have been required to be able to orchestrate this kind of a subterfuge, of an organization like the Hezbollah, which is, the Hezbollah is not a ragtag. Most people, when they hear the word Hezbollah, they think of a kind of a ragtag terrorist organization. A bunch of guys just running around firing rockets. It's important to point out that the Hezbollah is a quasi-military force. They function like an army. They've got a rank system. They've got heavy-duty conventional weapons. They've got drones. They've got anti-tank missiles. They've got anti-air weaponry. So they are very much a small army of kinds, and it's important to see it as that. And for an organization like the Hezbollah to be deceived at so many different levels, and we'll get into why this was like a perfect storm, would have taken a lot of work. There's a New York Times report that's come out just at the time that we're recording this podcast, which suggests that the pagers and the devices that were sent into Lebanon were actually Israeli. They were made by Israel, contracted by Israel, by a front company, and that the planning stages actually began sometime in 2022. Before everyone is seeing this in the context of the 2023 October 7th attack by Hamas, but the scary part or the unsettling part of all this is that these explosions, the seeds for these explosions were planted more than a year before what happened in Israel last year. So I think the result of all that planning has come back to work for the Mossad at this point of time.
Right. Yeah, it's almost as though they've had several contingency plans or contingency operations that they must have had filed somewhere. Like you have militaries doing war game scenarios, right? So you take a particular scenario and you war game it and you keep it safe somewhere. In case something like this happens in real life, we'll perhaps do that. So perhaps they just went to their cupboard, dust of the old files, and okay, this operation, let's give it a go and let's launch it. Most of our listeners, most of you viewers would have definitely read all the theories that are out that have been out there for the last couple of days about what may have gone down. But just for a refresh for everybody's memory and to kind of make our conversations easier. Based on what you've read, based on your understanding of this world, your understanding of explosives, your understanding of communication equipment, and of course the New York Times report that you said, because that's a very interesting report. Up until now, the theory was that Israel at some point kind of hijacked, so to speak, a consignment that was meant to be delivered to the Hezbollah and either swapped those pagers or tampered with them and then something like that. But what we are now learning from the New York Times report is that they actually set up a, so to speak, factory where they manufactured these pagers ready with this explosive and then sent it to Lebanon for Hezbollah to use. But that's like the source of it. There are obviously different aspects to it. For example, how did they ensure the consignment reached the right people? Correct. How did they ensure it detonated at the right moment and stuff like that? And would there have been some sort of practice run done somewhere, maybe in a sort of a safe environment, to ensure something like this is actually pulled off in real world? Your thoughts and your views on this?
So first of all, Dave, when it comes to Israel, almost nothing is a contingency plan. They don't have contingency plans. Everything is all systems go, red alert, because Israel is a kind of country which has a security system that is hyper alert practically all of the time because the circumstances that surround it have never calmed down even for a moment for the last many decades, which is actually why October 7th last year became such a big blot on their record. So there are no old dusty files. There's no contingency. Everything is like ready to go at a moment's notice. As far as the fact that Israel managed to do something like this, have a plan of this kind, one has to remember that I made the point that the Hezbollah is not just some small terrorist organization or a militant organization. They work like a quasi-army. But the history between Israel and the Hezbollah goes back a long way. Israel has fought the Hezbollah for decades together now. The Hezbollah is not a new organization. Conflict with Lebanon has led to, if I'm not mistaken, two previous occasions in which Israel has invaded southern Lebanon and occupied territory over there. So there is a very violent history between Israel and the Hezbollah in particular, as far as the larger conflict is concerned. Now, Israel is keenly aware of how the world is perceiving it right now. Israel is also very keenly aware of how how its reputation as an impregnable, resourceful, very agile country was almost irreparably damaged, and we've done an episode on that here on In Our Defense, and partially for those reasons, but for many more important reasons, Israel knew that it needed to hit back, and this was not. Let's be very clear about one thing, Dave. This was not so much about sending a message. All actions are about sending a message. There's no doubt about it. And you were in the gym when you saw it, and you almost fell off your treadmill, and people were shocked all over the world. It sent out a message because it was shocking to see that a mundane item like a pager was exploding in this extremely coordinated symphony of destruction in different parts of Lebanon. We'll get to the unanswered questions in just a bit, but I come back to the point that for Israel, this was much more about just badla, much more about sending a message, much more than about narrative. This was operational. This was very, very operational, because the depth and complexity of what it would have taken for Israel to execute something like this. For instance, we don't know if any ground assets of Israel who would undoubtedly have been required to execute an operation like this. How else will you know who has the pagers?
Yes.
How else will you know where those people are? There's only so much you can do with drones and satellites and things. You've got to have had moles and spies on the ground. And only a fool will tell you that Israel has nobody on the ground in Lebanon. Of course they do. So given all these huge numbers of complexities, for Israel to be able to actually execute this, I see it not only as believable, because it's something that even today, like Wednesday, now we're recording this on Thursday. It happened today as well. We've seen it happen with walkie-talkies.
Yes.
I've seen reports about solar panels, in one incident, a mobile phone as well. This takes a kind of coordination that is impossible to do without an extreme level of infiltration. This is not just about electronic intelligence. This is not just about keeping an eye with satellites or drones. This is about this is a covert operation. At the beginning of this episode, you said we don't know if it was a spy operation. Hell, it was a spy operation. Hell, it was a covert operation behind quote unquote enemy lines, where a very, very much Fauda-like scenario would have played out. It may not have been as romanticized as the show shows us, but I'm saying that it's very much about Mossad assets having to make sure that this plan actually plays out in the way that they want to. Look, it's one thing to let's sort of boil it down to its basic. What basically happened, according to the New York Times report, is that pagers manufactured by Israel, whether they were manufactured in Israel or elsewhere, we'll be hearing about Hungary or somewhere. It was Israel that manufactured and controlled the manufacture of these pagers, and they were purpose-built as pager bombs. They were obviously not built as pagers. They were built as pager bombs. But we don't know if they were programmed to explode at some point of time. We don't know exactly what the trigger was. There are many theories that one particular text went and at that time it exploded. Nobody knows for sure how, what technology actually worked. But what I'm trying to say is pagers are primitive enough devices that there would have had to be a kind of physical presence on the ground to ensure the delicate dance of destruction that took place in Beirut and other places happened in a coordinated manner. I've seen disparate reports of the identities of some of the people who were killed, and they all appear to be sort of mid-level Hezbollah people. Now, that can't be a coincidence. That cannot be a coincidence. You very rightly asked, how did Israel know exactly who the pagers are going to go to? How were they able to ensure that level of infiltration? Were people compromised within the Hezbollah? Was there someone on the inside who was helping Israel? There must have been. All these questions remain completely unanswered. But I hate to add romance to something that involves destruction. But this is a terrible and violent business that we're talking about. If we have to look at it very clinically, as far as Mossad is concerned, as far as Israel is concerned, they would regard this as a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, because a parallel to draw for this, even though it's a very simplistic, perhaps an example is, you think of, let's say, an iPhone launch, and over the years you've come to a space where it's become almost impossible for Apple not to have any leaks before a new phone is launched, because of the sheer scale at which their operations work, from where it's designed to where it's manufactured to where the components are sourced from, and to the fact that they have to kind of get to third-party vendors for them to be able to build accessories. Again, like I said, it's a sort of simplistic example, but the point I'm trying to get to is that what I thought that in this world and in this day and age, to do an operation like this, you mentioned at the beginning of this episode that there have been reported to be instances in the past where Israel has done something like this, but that was at perhaps the individual level. It was perhaps one person, two people, three people maximum. This was a large scale. This was 1,000 pages is what we are hearing. This is a large consignment. So for them to be able to keep this hidden from the world, when the manufacturing was happening, for example, when the consignment was being shipped, for example, when the consignment was being delivered, for example, when the negotiation was happening, I mean, I'm guessing if the New York Times reporters we believe, then the person who sold the pages to Hezbollah must have been either an Israeli agent or must have been compromised by Israel at some level, right? So that we've talked about the sophistication that will have existed on Israel side of operations. There may have been help from some of its Western allies. But for Hezbollah, you said it's not a ragtag bunch. It's sort of a quasi-military organization. It has its protocols. It would have had its security, counterintelligence measures, etc., stuff like that. For them to be deceived like this, at how many levels do you think this group must have had to fail for something like this happen? I just mentioned a couple of them. For example, when you're buying a consignment of pages, then you would obviously try to ensure that the person you're buying it from is, the background checks are done, etc., stuff like that. When the pages arrive, I'm pretty sure you would be doing some sort of an anti-sabotage check. Maybe not on every device, but maybe a couple of them, 5, 10. Because you have to remember that the reason Hezbollah was buying these pages in the first place was because they had told their fighters not to use mobile phones, because they were scared that Mossad would be tracking those devices and using them to kind of eliminate their fighters. So they were aware they are under the threat of Mossad. So that's the reason they bought these pages. So do you think it all failed spectacularly, or I don't know, how else do you explain this?
I think there was a level of complacency in the Hezbollah. The question you ask is probably the most important one. At how many different levels would there have needed to be failure at the Hezbollah or Lebanese level for something like this to actually succeed? 2021, 2022 is when the Hezbollah decided, like you rightly pointed out, Dev, that they are going to stop using mobile phones. They started using burner phones for a while. That also didn't work out for them, because mobile phones are the easiest things to track. They're like magnets for surveillance. And this is for all of our viewers as well. If you've got a mobile phone, the world knows everything about you. At least if anyone's looking for information about you, your mobile phone gives you away 100% of the time, right? So mobile phones were like a ridiculous thing for an organization like the Hezbollah to use, especially when your adversary is Israel. I'm actually surprised that it dawned on them in 2021, 22. But basically, during the pandemic, they decided, we've got to stop using mobile phones, and they thought pagers is the way to go, because Lebanon still has a paging service, and they decided, let's go back to this, because this will be like our this will be like our safeguard. This will be like our redundancy. This they cannot penetrate. You can't hack a pager. You can't infiltrate a pager, because if the world has moved on from pager technology, unke paas kya hoga? How can they hack like a landline phone or a pager and stuff, which is of a bygone era? That's point number one. Point number two, like you rightly said, that not only is the Hezbollah not a ragtag organization, they don't just have their own intelligence. They enjoy intelligence support from Iran.
Yes.
And and possibly from other countries as well. So they've got real conventional access to intelligence resources from Iran and elsewhere. So they've got. It's not a bunch of guys looking through a telescope at Israel. They've got real data and information and actionable material to act on. Act on Israel. Where do you think they get their targeting information from? So complacence may have been a part of it, even though they were in a live action situation with Israel post October 7th last year, where actual kinetic exchanges were happening between both sides. But that's not something Hezbollah is not used to. Their exchanges of missiles and drones and shooting down planes and stuff, that's a pretty normal day on the northern border of Israel and the southern border of Lebanon. So complacence and hubris may have been part of it. They may have thought that pagers are impregnable, we are safe. Point number two, these pagers may have been, we don't know exactly when the pagers became operational in Lebanon. There are reports suggesting few months to a year or so. But this also, we have to leave room for the possibility that the users of these pagers were using them for a while. And they were working like normal pagers. They were working like they were supposed to work. There was a subscription. You get, like how drug dealers use pagers, in those shows and movies. You get a page, then you go to a local pay phone, use a phone, and you call whoever you need to call. So that it's difficult to track. Israel can't track like millions of pay phones and stuff like that. That's how the Hezbollah, I'm presuming, were carrying out their operations. Complacence, hubris, but I think what they didn't account for is that when you stop using a mobile phone, it's not like Israel's thinking, oh, they've stopped using mobile phones, now that's it. Now that door is closed and, it's no point. There is absolutely no point trying to track their communications anymore. That would have been the most ridiculous. I'm not saying that's what the Hezbollah thought, but I'm saying at some level, the complacence and the laziness, keeping your guard down on that aspect of it, must have been one of the layers of failure. But your question, Dev, is crucial, because for that pager, let's just take one. Let's pick up one pager as an example. One pager that Israel has manufactured, whether it is Hungary or wherever. Let me, as a lay person when it comes to supply chain and pagers. I know nothing about pagers and how countries buy them, but let me just hazard a guess as to how many levels of failure would have had to be there. How much of the supply chain would have needed to be compromised? There would have had to be a deception as far as the tendering process is concerned.
Yes.
There would have been a deception as far as the order placing is concerned. There would have been a deception as far as export licensing is concerned. There would have been a deception as far as the paperwork for the consignment dispatch is concerned, from wherever, from Hungary to Israel to wherever. There would have been some kind of deception as far as receiving the freight is concerned, or the transport through which these pagers would have gone. There would have been a deception in terms of the distribution of those pagers once they reached Lebanon. There would have been a deception in terms of what this front company was, whether it was licensed to actually conduct these transactions. That would have been one of the key deceptions, of course. There would have been a deception in terms of the retail or distribution of these pagers and to whom. Who was it who ensured that at least some of these pagers went to the people they were intended to go to? There would have been a deception, in terms of actual subscription plans to use those pagers. Who was providing that service? How were these pagers compatible with that service? There would have been a deception on the inside to share whatever details Lebanon uses for its paging technology, so that Israel, your biggest enemy country, is able to manufacture compatible pagers for that time. There would have been a deception in terms of any kind of fail-safe. If someone checks with Taiwan ki ye front company aapke hi bande hai na?
Yeah.
There would have been a deception there, because what the hell? I mean, now we're finding out there's a front company. There would have been a deception in terms of payments, all transactions as far as the pagers are concerned. Money would have changed hands. And I don't think I've even scratched the surface in terms of the number of places which would have been compromised It must have been a perfect storm of compromise and deception for something like this to work. Because even one of these layers, or the many layers which I haven't mentioned, if one person in any of these layers had a bit of a doubt,
Yeah.
this whole thing would have collapsed like a house of cards. If there was even one tiny bit of doubt, they would have, figured it out. If they could, maybe opened them. I mean, it's difficult to figure out something of this depth very, very quickly. But I'm saying that it would have taken a single layer of failure for this whole thing to slip out of Israel's hands.
Yeah.
And remember that it required a perfect fail-safe compromise of the entire supply chain, not in one go on one day for 1 minute, but over many months.
Many months, yeah, exactly.
Many months, which means agency after agency, Hezbollah leader after Hezbollah leader, government official after government official, trader after trader, shopkeeper after shopkeeper, service provider after service provider, customs guy after customs guy, border security guy after border security guy. The entire chain had to have failed for something like this to happen, for a tiny little pager to be where it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, this is like the Mona Lisa of deceptions.
Yeah.
It doesn't get bigger than this.
Yeah. Every deception that you spoke about right now, that almost read like a chapter of a screenplay that would be this perfect movie that would recount this entire operation. And I'm pretty sure a decade or two from now, like you have had movies on the famous operation that was launched by Mossad after the attack on the Olympics.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of the operation that Mossad had named it. But anyway, they launched it. So you have one entire movie on that. Similarly, I think there'll probably be a movie on this. But something interesting that you mentioned over there, that this was so secretive. This had to be so secretive over so many months. And that one mistake at one level, even for a day, could have spoiled, months of effort. Which is why I was a bit surprised at how quickly we in the media and just like people in the world have been able to understand what happened mota. It happened on a Wednesday and we are just 2 days after that, and you have 70% of the operation figured out in terms of what mota happened, not the actual who was involved, where the manufacturing happened, what exact explosive was used, the number of grams used in it, the way that it happened, stuff like that. But you have this operation more or less figured out, which is quite shocking, because I thought on that day that if Israel is involved, it's going to take years for someone to dig out, some investigative journalist to talk to hundreds of people and figure out this entire operation. But within a matter of days, you had sources from both the sides, Hezbollah as well as from the West, not so much from Israel, but kind of coming from the West, telling you how this operation was structured and framed. How do you see that? Do you see that as part of the modern day psychological warfare, or do you see that just much better reporting?
Oh, there's a great deal of psychological warfare at play, and remember that even though Israel has not come on record about this, except for saying that they had nothing to do with it. There are a huge amount of off-record briefings taking place. Officials briefing the press, and telling them, painting a narrative over something like this. Because remember, this is a situation like so many others that we've seen recently, where Israel or any other country in question doesn't want to admit to having done something, but obviously is enjoying the credit, because they know that that's exactly what sends a message. The assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, even now Israel has not taken formal credit for it, but we all know who did it, right? Which country did it. So psychological warfare is most definitely one part of it. Of course, there is better reporting. There are better resources to report. There is the ability to look at circumstantial evidence. There are more subject matter experts in journalism today, all across the world, who can look at, photographs, video transcripts, audio even, and all kinds of things, and piece together angles to stories which may otherwise be missed. The Israel, the West Asia conflict particularly, has always had a great deal of a journalistic spotlight from all over the world. So there is never a shortage of expert journalistic attention to what's happening there. So you usually have really good people looking at the stories. Apart from the two sides warring over the propaganda issues, there are really credible, OSINT and subject matter experts who are looking at these things and speaking credibly about them. You're right. It took hours for people to paint a pretty credible picture of what may have actually happened. But the reason for that also, Dave, is because at the heart of it, what happened, it's a bit of a paradox. What happened was terribly complex to plan, but what actually happened was really simple.
True, to execute, yeah.
What happened was laughingly simple. A bunch of guys with pagers, and those pagers just blew up in their pockets or in their hands or whatever it is. It's almost comical. I don't want to make light of something that's this serious, but it's almost comical what happened. So let's never forget that the gargantuan levels of planning and meticulousness that would have gone in from Israel's side to be able to achieve something like this in the coordinated way that it happened, in the targeted way that it happened. The cause, the planning was complex, but the effect was crazy simple. It was like a comic book. So Israel understands that. They understand they also understand the power of that simplicity. It took a matter of minutes for newsrooms to understand exactly what happened. Arey, pager ud gaya. People, hundreds of people carrying pagers, and the pagers blew up. How did that happen? Oh, you must have sent a message. One particular message came, and there was a bit of 20 grams of explosives in each pager, and it blew up. And the thing is, another reflection of what a simple issue it is that the fact that 1 hour after the story broke, there were memes.
Yeah.
There were memes, internet memes about what happened, and cartoons and things like that. I mean, that's a matter of taste. I mean, let's be clear, because this is a serious, violent business. No laughing matter at all. But I'm just saying that this was simple to digest. It was shocking because of the audacity of it. Of, man, how did they do that? But there was no question of what happened. Nobody was asking, "Arey, hua kya hai?" Everyone understood how it happened, because there's almost an elegance to meticulous plans of violence. Yeah. You talked about 1972 Operation Bayonet, Wrath of God. The revenge operation mounted by the Mossad for the Black September killings in 72, where Israeli Olympians were massacred by Black September, which was the Palestinian organization that time. The Mossad mounted what turned out to be a 2-decade revenge operation. 2 decades. It's one of a handful of operations that actually gave Mossad its fearsome reputation of, once it decides on revenge, it doesn't let go. No rest until revenge has been, taken. And the Munich massacre and the revenge operations that followed, Operation Wrath of God, took 2 decades. And I think, see, the thing about Mossad is also, most people remember that Mossad managed to wipe out most of the people who were responsible for the killings. They killed one with a phone bomb. They killed another with something else. One guy was killed in a phone booth. One guy was killed in a restaurant. One guy was killed in his bed. One guy was honey trapped. One guy was killed somewhere in Europe, somewhere else. But the kingpin of that operation, they still, Abu Dawood, if I remember correctly, was his name. They didn't manage to kill him. He still escaped the Mossad. And he died of a kidney failure in 2010. He escaped the world's most fearsome intelligence, covert operations, assassination organization, and died peacefully of renal failure in his 80s. So most people, that's the ironic part of Mossad history as well. But so I think the fact that the last few days in some ways sees some of that damage that was done to Mossad's reputation come back is also something we should talk about.
Yeah.
Because remember, in this realm where not just violence, but the threat of violence or deterrence, which we talk so much about, and what Israel can do. Don't you dare do anything to Israel because this is what can happen to you. Is all about reputation. It's all about smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that's what Mossad is about. It's about what they will do to you if you mess with them. And that was severely damaged last year in October when the Hamas hit, because it showed, it revealed Mossad to be like any other organization that can be caught sleeping, that can be compromised, that can be caught with its pants down. And this is the beginning of building that back. And also remember, a very important thing, Dave, is that with these pagers and mobile phones and whatever it is, these devices exploding, it's a new era of warfare for us, but it's also a turning point in the battle.
Yeah.
What the hell is Hezbollah going to do now? Any army, quasi-army organization, whatever it is, even a terrorist organization, needs to be able to communicate. How do you communicate reliably if you can't trust any of your devices? Are you going to make a mountain of all your mobile phones and devices of all kinds and burn them? How do you check? How do you even begin to check? And what do you do in the meantime while you check everything? How do you know what's compromised and not compromised? It's absolutely hell right now as far as the Hezbollah is concerned.
Yeah, and we'll just come right to that. The objectives of what Israel may have wanted to achieve with this operation, and what's this going to do to the situation in the Middle East. But after a quick break.
If you go by the data, if just 2022 alone, 2.26 lakh of Canada's 5.5 lakh international students were from India.
Governments can change policies about how they want their internal dynamics to work.
Those who go for their postgraduate programs, they have this idea in their mindset, of course, after completing their postgraduate, they'll anyway get the work permit and then they'll start working in Canada.
Too many of them who travel to Canada to study, and then they expect that they will be allowed to work, which will lead to PR, to maybe staying in Canada itself. When a student says, I feel cheated, why are you feeling cheated is the question. Are you feeling cheated because you were not imparted the education that you paid for? Are you feeling cheated because the money that you paid was way more than what the university normally charges? What are you being cheated for? Governments can change policies about how they want their internal dynamics to work. If you're feeling cheated because you planned a future in a country where you've just gone to study, if you're just a student, your focus has to be studying there and coming back.
Right.
So why are you feeling cheated? Why are 70,000? And I know it's very sad because they all spent, a lot of them, their family and parents must have sold off their land and property to get their children to go for their education to Canada. If the sole purpose is to get a PR, then who is being cheated here?
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing the last couple of days in the Middle East. Not that we've been there, but what has been happening in Middle East. Pages blew up, and the day later, walkie-talkies blew up in Lebanon. These devices were being used by the Hezbollah, members of the Hezbollah. Shiv made a very interesting point that these were mostly middle-level operators of the group. We've spent the first half talking about how the operation may have been planned, wide media reports, but there's more or less a clarity, and most reports sort of agree on the larger picture of what may have happened. If they kind of disagree on the operational aspect of what may have had to take place for this to be achieved. We've talked about the sheer complexity of launching this sort of a Trojan horse operation in the modern world. And touch briefly also on the many failures on the side of Hezbollah that would have had to happen for something like this to succeed. Not just Hezbollah, by the way, also Lebanon and Iran, the backer of Hezbollah, which has been given in monetary and intelligence support, etc. Let's now focus briefly on what's this going to do to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The conflict, like we know, began as in not the present conflict, because the Middle East has seen various conflicts, and so many conflicts that we can't even cover them over, I think, several episodes. But the present conflict, which will be reaching a couple of weeks from now, October 7, when Hamas launched an attack on Israel, killed more than 1,000 citizens. And then Israel has launched a war onto Hamas, and you've had all these regional powers being pulled in, Iran, etc. Now it's Hezbollah. Before the break, you mentioned how this is gonna be sort of this new phase in this war, and that's actually the exact phrase that was used by Israel's defense minister yesterday, when Israel so far has not commented on this operation at all, but he said that there is a new phase in the war, and then he spoke about how I don't know if he spoke about it, but there have been reports of Israel moving a large contingent of his forces north towards Lebanon, we don't know yet if it will invade. We don't know what will happen. We don't know how Hezbollah will kind of react to it, etc. But we'll kind of see what this attack does to the larger picture. So one, Shiv, what do you think was Israel's objective? I think in the first half kind of touched upon various aspects. One, that this was about sending a message. Two, that this was about Mossad trying to regain its image, its legacy, which was severely tarnished after the October 7 attack. And the third thing you mentioned, I also found quite interesting, is that even though journalists may not choose to report on it because it's kind of it's not kosher, it's not nice, but it did cause a lot of ridicule on social media. It led to memes, like you said. In the newsroom itself, you were quite divided. This is not really in good taste, but at the same time, people were having fun. And when you were saying that, I thought perhaps this was also an objective for Israel, that reduce Hezbollah to this sort of ridicule Hezbollah basically at the global level. Those perhaps could have been some objectives, and the larger military strategic objective, because at the end of the day, if you look at the operation and the number of deaths of Hezbollah operators, we don't know the exact number, but a couple of dozen. Not something that you would expect in a large military operation. The injuries, I'm guessing, will not be that major, because these are very low-level explosives, right? What do you think was Israel's larger objective when it planned an operation like this?
So, it's interesting that you mentioned ridicule, because in the world of psychological operations, psychological warfare, and believe me, I've not only studied this, but I was there last year after the attack by the Hamas. Psychological mind games and operations are not a sideshow in this battle. They are very, very important to how Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, conduct themselves. They know what the worth of a message is. They know what, how powerful mind games can be. Israel has been frequently accused of, creating facts to justify, violent offenses, etc. So this has happened. Palestinians have been accused of using human shields. So the counterclaims, war continues endlessly between Israel and its adversaries. In the case of Hezbollah, like I said, the conflict between Israel and the Hezbollah is not new. It's been going on for a very long time. It's shape-shifted in many ways. But the fact of the matter is, apart from the ridicule, and I think ridicule would very much have been part of it. The memes, the laughter and the cartoons and the comics and everything about Hezbollah fighters getting their essentials blown off, etc. It boils down to a matter of taste. But this is a terrible and polarizing subject. So people have the freedom to find such things funny, because we live in a world where there are issues of, are they terrorists or are they freedom fighters or are they militants, and you have people who have all of those thoughts. So people should be allowed to find what they want funny, and I think Israel would enjoy it very much that people are finding it funny that Hezbollah is been caught in this ridiculous manner, with these pagers. But apart from that, let's be very clear about one thing. This wasn't a psychological operation. There was something distinctly operational about targeting the middle rungs of the Hezbollah. When you're talking about the middle rungs, Dev, you're talking about the colonels and brigadiers.
Yes.
Let's not compare the Hezbollah with a real army. But since we're presenting them as a quasi army, they've got a rank structure, they've got uniforms, they've got they've got a lot of military regalia and military rituals and things like that, and they've got commanders and everything. So by targeting your mid-rung, which are your colonels and brigadiers, you're basically targeting the layer of the organization that basically does most of the heavy work, that does most of the situational planning, most of the execution. We're not talking about the creamy layer, which is the leadership, of the Hezbollah. Many of whom are in Lebanon, many who aren't in Lebanon. The creamy layer. This is not targeting them because those people very rarely get into actual tactical planning. The military aspect of what the Hezbollah does. But by targeting these mid-level guys who are supremely well-trained, military-style operatives of the Hezbollah, you're breaking the organization's teeth. You're going after the organization's teeth. You're going after them where it actually hurts. You're not going after their foot soldiers. Your foot soldiers are cannon fodder. They're the guys who are out there, not very well-trained, there to do most of the dirty work, easily expendable, easily replaceable, steady stream of discontent youth who will join an organization like the Hezbollah. Targeting them means nothing because there's a steady flow of such guys. Targeting the senior leadership also doesn't really make much sense because it's mostly symbolic. Yes, it does affect command and control, etc. But there are the Hezbollah does have replacements for senior leaders. Reasonably senior leaders as well. But the mid-rung, the middle class of the Hezbollah are your guys who have military experience, who've actually been out there fighting, who've seen the worst of these operations, who have a history within the organization of 15, 20 years, who are, maybe in their 30s, 40s or later, who are still physically fit to actually be in operations, who are heading teams of operatives to actually conduct these offensive operations on Israel. These are the actual offensive edge of the Hezbollah. They're not your pawns, and they're not your king and queen. They're your knights, and they're your the other chess pieces that are actually holding fort and being part of actually what's going out there. So this was not a coincidence. This was not a shotgun effect by Israel saying, let's just spray 1,000 pagers into Lebanon, and who knows who's going to use them. But ultimately, some Hezbollah guys will die. A dead Hezbollah guy is good news for us. That's not what it was. They've killed, at last count, like you said, 2,025. Mostly mid-rung Hezbollah guys. There's a pattern here. It would be too much for it to be a complete coincidence. So, while a section of the world laughs at the memes, in Israel, they're giving high fives to each other because at least one part of this operation has gone exactly how they wanted it to operationally, because they've been able to take the sting out of the Hezbollah's tail in terms of what it can do. Now, how Hezbollah reacts, that's a different story. I'm not saying that these people are not replaceable. Of course they are. But I'm just saying that it's a huge message. It means that not only can we hurt you, but we can hurt you where we want to hurt you. That's the message.
Yeah. And this also means that the conflict over there is not ending anytime soon. With the assassination of the Hamas chief recently, a few weeks ago, you also had some instances in between where you had rockets being fired and drones taking them down and stuff like that. Every moment for world watchers, people like you and me, has been, this is it when there's a full-fledged war on the ground. This is it when there's a full-fledged war on the ground. Even this one has been like, this is it, now there's a full-fledged war on the ground. I think it's pointless to kind of predict when that'll happen because it just depends on reactions and counter reactions. But so we won't get into that speculation. But what I want to understand is Israel knows there's going to be a reaction in some form or the other. Maybe not a conventional reaction. Something or the other will happen. It's probably prepared for it. So it basically also means that it's prepared for the long haul. It's prepared for this to escalate and go out of control. Even though it will probably have the West. There'll be like source-based reports like they always are, that the West is very angry with Israel, but on the ground they'll be kind of supporting it, etc. Then does this go back to your previous, not, I wouldn't say it's a theory, but you've consistently maintained this every time we've discussed the topic of Israel and the Palestine conflict right now, that after October 7, after what happened last year, Israel is prepared to do everything to kind of resolve this once and for all. As in, at least that's what they think they're doing. Whether they'll practically be able to do, we don't know that. But their thought process right now, no matter what it takes, whether it's Hamas to the south east of us, or whether it's Hezbollah to the north of us, we are going to just like take this opportunity when we have the backing of the West because of what happened on October 7, stuff like that, and we're just going to do whatever is in our power to once and for all solve this issue. And do you think this is where it's coming from?
Look, it's been a year. It's hard to imagine that it's already been a year since what happened in October 7th last year. And no matter what experts say about this so-called elusive end game for Israel is concerned, I don't see this ending in any other way other than some kind of a ceasefire. Okay. A brokered ceasefire of some kind. Because look at the reality on the ground, Dev. The Hamas in Gaza is decimated. Gaza is basically the world's biggest humanitarian catastrophe right now. Thousands upon thousands of people and civilians have been killed. Thousands of children and babies have been killed there. It's a unmitigated human catastrophe, and there is no other way to put it. It's not something that Israel is unused to. Israel, has been in this situation before, but at some point of time, it's going to have to step back on what's happened in Gaza. That one of the signs of that is you're looking at the government now saying we've turned our gaze up north now. Now that gives you a sense that perhaps there could be some kind of a ground operation on foot as far as Lebanon is concerned. Could be very much part of something that Israel. It's part of the Israeli playbook. Invading southern Lebanon is something that Israel has done twice before. During very similar conflicts. So there's no reason to believe. Again, if a limited ground operation of some kind happens in southern Lebanon with Israeli forces crossing and taking territory, I wouldn't be surprised even slightly, because that would be another message to the Hezbollah and Iran. But I think in terms of actionable, very specific, identifiable, a kind of checklist of things to achieve before Israel says, okay, now we've completed our operation and now we're willing to stop the operations. I don't think even Israel knows what that is right now. Because even for Israel, that checklist looks like this. The complete decimation of Hamas, the complete decimation of Houthis, the complete decimation of Hezbollah, a rescue of all our hostages. And none of these four things that I've mentioned is ever going to be a reality as far as Iran continues to exist. Okay? So it is in even Israel. See, the thing is, from the outside, it's sometimes tempting to think of Israel as this kind of a country with a limitless appetite to get even, and an insatiable thirst to keep this conflict running. But no, Israel most definitely doesn't want to do that. On the surface of it, of course, the message is no, we won't stop until these things are achieved. But believe me, countries will be looking for that exit ramp, whether it is in the form of a ceasefire, whether it is in the form of a brokered peace deal, whether it is in the form of a US president flying down and holding a camp, and maybe winning a Nobel Peace Prize on the side,
of course.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I'm just saying, all of those things are options and possibilities that even a country like Israel looks for. None of these countries are saying, nay, bring it on, we'll keep this on forever. They can't do it. It's not possible. That's why no Israeli operation has lasted for years and years and years and years. It's never like that. So this time the escalation has been a big one. For the first time, the possibility of it actually exploding into a regional conflict has been large because of the very overt Iranian factor in this case. Not like Iran has not been involved before. I'm just saying it's very overt this time. There have been attacks from Iranian territory. There have been airstrikes in Iran killing the Hamas chief. So the level of escalation is, on the brink of a wider conflict. But that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's the biggest message, Dev, that now it needs to end in some way or the other. It's just a question of identifying what the terms of that end are really going to be.
Yes. And I guess a lot also depends on what happens on November 5 in the US, where you have Donald Trump and Kamala Harris facing off, and depending on who comes to power at the White House, that also maybe change a lot of things. Right. So final thought on this, and we'll come back home now because Anna complained during the break, by the way. To our listeners and viewers, by the way, if you're also, annoyed with our producer Anna complaining that we keep, going into her territory because she also hosts a podcast on our network called Geeta's World, where they explore geopolitics, do let us know in the comments so that we have some, sort of firepower to go against her.
Yeah,
with
let's
us.
make our listeners compare now.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll be doing an episode on Israel and Lebanon and stuff.
They might have done it because we are one day late in recording, so I don't know if they've already done that or not. Yeah, we'll just check with her
Face
after
off.
this. Yeah. Anyway, coming to my question. Yeah, coming back home. Lessons from this for India. And when I ask this, I first want to actually ask, is this conflict sort of a conflict that India would even be taking lessons from? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this, because for most people actually in India, we are quite far removed from this conflict, and we don't picture ourselves ever being in such a conflict, because the Israel conflict and the Middle East conflict historically has been a very unconventional one. It's not the wars that we fought. Those are conventional wars across this, one clear demarcated line of boundary between two proper nations, whether it's India, Pakistan or India, China. The standoff that we're involved in right now is also against a conventional, a neighbor, a proper army with hopefully some sense of professionalism, etc., stuff like that. Whereas for most people, what's happening in the Middle East is quite confusing. The lines are very blurred. You have this, all these influences from the West and the regional powers, the regional factors, etc., etc. So for many people would think something like this, for example, let's put it like this. For example, communication devices of Indian officers, Indian army officers being rigged with explosives. I'm not saying being tampered with to spy on them. Rigged with explosives is not something that would happen in a standoff with China, for example. So are there lessons even to be learned for India from something that happened, like what happened this week with the pages blowing up? And second, if there are, then what would they be for you?
Dev, I cannot overstate what enormous lessons there are for India, the Indian military, Indian security agencies in this small operation that's happened in Lebanon. If there ever was a case for sensitive communication equipment, sensitive, electronic equipment being sourced only from within your country, this is it. Okay, I don't want to sound like a sort of unhinged China basher, but our country is awash with Chinese phones.
Yes.
I'm not saying please, I'm not being alarmist and unreasonable. I'm not saying that Chinese phones are, there's an explosive risk. I am just saying that it is not far-fetched at all for a country that you are at war with, for hell's sake, literally at war with, in Ladakh, for something like this to happen. Is it so inconceivable? Is it so inconceivable that China, which controls a staggering portion of your mobile phone market, is it so far-fetched to think that supply chain in some way or the other cannot be compromised? Do we know how many Chinese phones are there in the Indian military? Do we know how many Chinese drones are used, even though there's a ban within the forge? Do we know how many Chinese devices of any kind are being used within the Indian security agencies, including our spy agencies? We don't know for sure. Israel would have conducted, many months, perhaps years of surveillance on the Lebanese to find out where those gaps are. Are we sitting here and saying that the Chinese aren't studying where our gaps are? They are spending months, years, decades hunting for our vulnerabilities. This is the reality. We are a country at war with another country, and phones from that country flood our nation. You're talking about communication. Please let's be very, very realistic with ourselves. It's not like at the end of the day in the military all communication happen on these strange high-tech encrypted devices. A lot of communication happens on off-the-shelf equipment like phones, normal mobile phones, WhatsApp and Messenger and things like that. You've banned TikTok, you've banned a whole bunch of apps. But what about the damn hardware? Now I am not saying, let the hammer fall and just ban Chinese devices. There are a huge number of things to consider before anyone can make that kind of a move. In terms of trade, in terms of commerce, in terms of all these things, India and China are deeply interlinked. We may be at war, but we are deeply interlinked. But it's something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is something to think about. All these phone companies, and apart, I don't want to take any brand names lest our little podcast gets sued, but there are big Chinese companies that make phones for India and they come into India, and there are many mid-level ones that flood our rural markets.
Yes.
Our rural markets are awash with Chinese phones. So, so many people from the Indian military come from the rural areas. So, I am just wondering whether these are vulnerabilities that we can think as far-fetched and kind of postpone until it's too late, or are we going to look at it right now? I'm sure this has been a very rude wake-up call to something that has already been a fear within the system. There have been, we in India, all decisions are piecemeal, incremental, ad hoc. So until something big happens, the country never wakes up. But I fear that something like this should wake a country like India up, because if another country is, controls the hardware that is the lifeline of your communications. I don't know what that percentage market share of Chinese phones in India is, but I suspect it must be eye-watering.
Yeah.
That is not, that's not going to let me sleep easy.
Yeah. Let's not forget that apart from phones that are made by Chinese companies, there are all China also has factories for many phone manufacturers that are not based in China per se. They may be based in other countries. They design those phones there, but they're assembled in China and then exported to many parts of the world, including India. So a supply chain hack is like what this attack in Lebanon is being described. If that were to happen, I'm guessing that's very much in the realm of possibility, if we can put it that way.
And this is strictly about possibility.
Yeah.
Because I'm not making a claim or even asking our listeners to think about big established reputed companies risking their reputations with clandestine operations of this kind. I'm not saying that, but this is China, a totalitarian state which controls many of these companies. And should push come to shove in an all-out conflict scenario, all state-owned assets will be weaponized.
Yeah.
And if your adversary is using hardware that's been manufactured by you under your scrutiny and with whatever you wanted in those phones, it basically gives your adversary a hand on your most vulnerable assets.
Yeah.
That's the scary part here.
Yeah. In fact, when you were talking about this, I just kind of recalled a conversation with one of our colleagues, a crime reporter. It happened quite a few months ago, where he spoke while talking about the risks, not risks per se, but like how easy it is to surveil your mobile phones. And he spoke about how around 80 to 90% of police investigations are just based on call data records.
Yeah.
Like, if you go to a police with a complaint about somebody, they will get his phone number, they will trace his location, and 90% of times the crime is solved just with that, because that's all they need. Kahan gaya, kitne baje gaya, everything is just available to them in one sheet of paper.
You can map a person's life with their phone records.
Question that person, and then that's it. That's all that happens. Right. Okay. Just as we end this, though, because I think this aspect, communication devices and our reliance on China and other countries, is, I think, another episode altogether now. Because I want to talk about something that happened just yesterday. One of the drones being used by the Indian Navy, and I'll explain why I'm talking about it in this episode, in this context, being leased by the Indian Navy from General Atomics, the Sea Guardian drone. Suffered a malfunction while it was in flight over the Indian Ocean, and it had to be like ditched out at sea. A euphemism for basically saying it crash landed.
crashed,
Yeah. I love how they just use these terms in the press releases.
Smooth.
Yeah, smooth. We won't talk about that in this episode in terms of what happened. But why I'm bringing this up is because I caught a tweet somewhere where this is what kind of interested me, was that because it was a leased drone, apparently whatever it mapped of the Indian Ocean, that is something that could be used by the US. Is that true?
So it's a little complicated, but the two drones that were leased by the Indian Navy starting in September 2020, they were based in an airbase in coastal Tamil Nadu. These are drones which are not operated by the Indian Navy.
Yes.
Which means that the drone operators, the handlers, the maintainers, the crew, all are employees of General Atomics, the company that makes these drones. So the Indian Navy obviously has access to the drones and access to the data, but the Indian Navy is basically the customer in this case, which provides it provides the mission outlines, saying that we need this area mapped for this amount of time with so and so criteria, and that data is harvested and provided to the Indian Navy. Now, the thing is, it's a bit of a non sequitur to say that information can also go to the US. The US already has that information. There is nothing about that information that the US doesn't already have. So I wouldn't be too troubled about anyone saying, oh, this information can also go back to the US. Technically speaking, under the terms of this contract, it can't go back to the US because this is the data is owned by the Indian Navy.
Oh, okay.
The data that the feeds, the video feeds, the photographs, the synthetic aperture radar imagery, whatever it is from the drones, are the property of the Indian Navy because the Indian Navy has asked for that data. And this is all Indian waters, the Indian Ocean and stuff. So it's highly classified material. There may be some sharing protocols as far as Indian Navy, US Navy, etc. But those are specific and case-to-case basis. But like I said, that would be a fairly trivial concern in my view because the United States has huge surveillance assets, including drones like the Sea Guardian, operating in the Indian Ocean at all times anyway. So this is not something that they don't have access to.
Right. Just something I thought of we could talk about because we talk on the subject. But
we should do an episode on the drones because that deal is also looming now.
Yes.
Should be concluded in a month or so.
We will. And one on communication devices and what's happening in India. Thanks, Shiv. Great chat. Had lots of fun. Good insights. And again, a subject I think we'll end up coming back to sometime soon. And that end game, that elusive end game, whatever that is, once it becomes a bit clearer, perhaps we'll discuss this once again. Thanks to our listeners and viewers, and thanks as always to our producer Anna Priyadarshini. And once again to our listeners and viewers, please keep on commenting. We love your comments, and whatever ideas you have that you want us to discuss, do let us know. We will definitely find a slot for them at some point. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and don't cross any boundaries of the passport. Bye-bye.